Good evening, everybody. Before we jump in on our topic tonight, which is the exotic world of Kashrus, a lot of interesting things to discuss. But just want to take a second and a moment to appreciate the moment, which is tonight is Kristallnacht. It's a night where we remember and we think back to the lives of our loved ones, in particular to the Jewish community. And it's a very difficult night as we think back to all the pain and all the suffering. But in many ways, there really is no greater thing for us to do than to study Torah and to show how we continue to survive, we continue to grow, we continue to learn, despite what our enemies and those who wish to do us harm try in this world. And so tonight, our learning is dedicated in memory of all those victims of the Shoah, our 6 million brothers and sisters. The men, the women, and the children, all innocent and beautiful in their lives. And so we remember them tonight. And in particular, our thoughts tonight are on Kristallnacht. And tonight's learning, again, we phrase in all of their memory. So I want to start with an interesting question. And again, I share the source sheets and again, another set of source sheets as well, which I think a lot of what I'm going to say tonight overlaps with that, which is why I shared it with you as well. I want to talk about, with Thanksgiving around the corner, everybody's always looking for the most interesting, the most exciting, different recipes and different ideas. And in fact, when I was at home, I was like flipping through cookbooks thinking like, okay, what are we going to do special for Thanksgiving? Thanksgiving happens to be like probably like one of my favorite holidays of the year because it's like, has all the elements of a great Yom Tov, but also includes football, right? You've got a big meal, you've got all your friends together, big meals, family, then you get to watch football too. So it's like the best of every world. And so we're like flipping through it, and there was a cookbook, which was like, I forget what it's called now. I think it's like Simply Kosher, I think that's what it's called. And it's like exotic recipes from around the world. And I thought to myself, oh, what kind of exotic recipes could there be? And there are exotic recipes from other like Sephardic recipes and things like that. But I thought to myself, well, if I wanted to impress my guests, well, I would love to go a little bit more exotic and maybe serve them something more special or something a little bit farther out there. And so I thought to myself, well, what kind of like, obviously it's traditional to serve turkey, and we'll talk about turkey next week. But I thought to myself, well, what would be something that would be interesting to serve? So I said, oh, like, I don't know, like, why couldn't I serve like giraffe? I don't know. We should have like, that would be such a wild thing. Can you imagine if we had like giraffe? And I thought to myself, well, I can't serve giraffe. Why can't I serve giraffe? Well, because have you ever had giraffe? I've never had giraffe. Has anyone on Zoom had giraffe? You could just like say yes or no. No one's saying yes. Okay, so none of you have had giraffe. I haven't had giraffe. But I can tell you that the celebrity chef once said that when it's properly prepared, cooked and rare giraffe meat is like incredibly sweet, sweeter than any steak or venison you might have. So I thought to myself, well, why can't we eat it? So there's this amazing article. If you flip your pages here, this comes from the Encyclopedia Levet Yisrael, and this is like by way of like context here. This is an encyclopedia, like a print book encyclopedia. I photocopied it from the book. Now, I've been told that in the olden days, there used to be like in everyone's home, you would have like an encyclopedia for knowledge. Like that's where you would find your information. I've heard of these things like relics. Like there used to be like phones also that I think you would like put your finger in and like circle or something. I don't know if it's true. I've heard of these things. And so I heard that there once were encyclopedias. Now this is actually a real life encyclopedia and it exists. And it's actually really interesting because whereas like, for instance, like my kids, they don't know what an encyclopedia is. They know what Google is. They know what the internet is. In certain parts of the Jewish community, for example, like in the Haredi community, well, they don't have the internet the way that we have the internet. So they actually very much rely on encyclopedias to tell them information about the world. And so this is a Haredi encyclopedia. I can share with you more of it if anyone wants to like, want to buy a copy or something. But I thought to myself, well, let me learn a little bit about giraffes. Now look what it tells us about giraffe. So this is giraffe. Starts on the left side of the page, giraffe. Minyonek africani, it's African. Nodabi karbet sabrei ha'aroch. How would you know that it's a giraffe? Well, it's got a very long neck, okay? And baraglav harachot v'gufo hamnumar, hagiraffe hu hachaya gvoa biyoter ba'olam. It's the tallest animal in the world. Gova hazachar magia at 6 meters. The male giraffe can be as tall as 6 meters. Shagovak to 3 meters. It's around 2.5 meters. So it's like describing all these things. And I'm just going to skip towards the bottom here. Hagiraffe misugali kayam tikfot arachot lo shtiya. A giraffe is able to last a long time without drinking. It even sleeps standing up. Mitzad hadin, hagiraffe uchayak shira. Technically speaking, the giraffe is a kosher animal. Ella shemipat savara haroch ein ladat ketzad shachta. But we can't eat the giraffe, the encyclopedia says. Why? Because we don't know how to shecht the giraffe. It's got this long neck, and we don't know the location on where to shecht said giraffe. This is the encyclopedia. So 2 things I take from this article. Number one, like, I just love that in the encyclopedia, it's telling us about like whether it's a kosher animal or not. I don't think that was in like Encyclopedia Britannica or things like that. And it's the second thing is it's telling us whether or not we can eat the animal, which again is just like a fascinating thing. So according to this encyclopedia in the Haredi community, it's like this is a really cool source. That's why I'm leading with it. We can't eat giraffe because while technically it might be kosher, the reason we can't do it is because we don't know how to shecht it. And I'm here to tell you that I'm not sure that is 100% correct. And in fact, this is like an apropos discussion because the Rambam tells us in box number 1, there's no number 1 on there, but it's the first box on your page. Mitzvahs aseh leida hasimanim shemabdilim behen bein beima v'chayav v'of dagim v'chagavim. There is actual mitzvah aseh. There's a positive commandment for us to know the signs between kosher animals. And the Rambam does us a favor here and breaks kosher animals into categories. So for example, we've got behema and achaya. So again, domesticated animals, wild animals, oath, birds, dagim, fish, v'chagavim, which he translates here as locust, but we'll just call like chagavim. The last category we'll call is like anything that's like all like the bugs or shratzim or things like that. That's like another category. Maybe invertebrate would be another category in addition to that. And there's a mitzvah say shemutar la'achlan. You should know which ones are kosher, so you know what to eat them. Ubein shein mutar la'achlan, and which ones you shouldn't eat. Shnamar, because the pasuk tells us there's a mitzvah saseh for us to know this, and there's another pasuk. So we have this mitzvah saseh here, and because of this mitzvah saseh, we have this obligation to I think explore this a little bit. So while yes, I'm interested in this because I think it's like a fascinating topic, I think that trying to understand what is and isn't kosher and how do we make sense of these exotic animals that we come across or that might exist out there that maybe the rabbis didn't come across in the Talmud or other places where they were, there's a positive mitzvah for us to figure this out. Now, in order for us to do so, we have to like do some really basic, like, what would I call it? Like foundational work. Let's do some basic foundational work. And then from there, we'll be able to start talking more broadly about some interesting things. So the Torah tells us in 2 different places in Vayikra and Devarim, there are 2 different locations in which the Torah describes to us the kosher animals, one in Parsha Shmini and one in Parshas Re'eh. They're in box number 2 and box number 3. So in box number 2, you'll see here that tells us, notice how it describes this. These are the kosher animals. Pasuk Gimel in Perek Yud Aleph, Kol Mafreset Parsa. Any animal that has hooves, v'shosat shasa prasod malat gerabai maut tochelu. So any animal that has true hoofs and cluster the hoofs, and also is chewing their cud. So again, has to have split hooves and chewing the cud. Totally split hooves is necessary. So that is how we define a kosher animal. Now, however, the Torah continues, Achad zeh lo tochelu. However, there are those things that you should not eat that either chew the cud or have split hooves. And those are what? Hagamal. This is the camel. The camel chews its cud but has no true hooves. And tamehulachan. And then it continues about the shafan in Pasuk and the arnevet and the chazir. And so these are different animals, and it's translated here The shafan, it's the daman. Some people erroneously translate the shafan to mean like a shafan in Hebrew means like a rabbit. It's not a rabbit. It's most likely some other type of animal. And our nevet is the hare, and a chazir we know to be like a pig, a swine, as it's described here. A lot of like homework and research I did to put this together is really just based on like countless articles that have been written about this. Natan Slifkin, I shared this other article that in the chat here. Natan Slifkin literally has like a 250-page book about this. Like you could just read the books. There's so much to talk about. In fact, when once I brought Rabbi Slifkin as a scholar in residence, and we took him to the zoo, and there's like really nothing cooler than going to the zoo with a biblical like zoo expert, a biblical animal expert, because you look at these different animals and you always think like, oh, well, the Torah describes it this way, it means this animal. And it's just very cool to see like the history of the animals and what animals is talking about. And for example, like all the animals that's listed in the Torah are all animals that existed in the biblical land of Israel. And so that means that animals that are not, what's the word I'm looking for, domesticated or from that area, right? So it would not be included. So this gives us proof about certain animals. And again, we'll talk more about that next week. Now, in Devarim, you'll notice that there's a repetition here, classic Devarim for us to have a repetition. And in Devarim, it tells us that notice, oh, why don't you tell me what the differences are in Devarim? Devarim tells us, Zog tabema asher tochelu, shor seches havim neseizim. These are the animals you can eat. An ox, a sheep, and a goat, ayal, utzvi, v'yachmor, deer, gazelle, v'yakov, rishon, utov, azamer, the roebuck, the wild goat, the ibex, the antelope, the mountain sheep. These are the animals you can eat. How many animals are there that you can eat if you were to count? There are 10 animals here. The Torah is explicitly telling us that we can eat. And any other animal that has true hooves, which are cleft in two and bring up the cud, again, split hooves, or choose a cud, you may eat. However, at these are the things you should not eat. Again, and again, it lists us the gamal, the arnevet, and the shafan, and then the chazir. These are the animals that you should not eat. By the way, Re'eh is my bar mitzvah parsha, and if you can imagine, like, these are not easy words for a 13-year-old boy to like wrap their head around, and I'm so appreciative of my father for pushing me to do it. So you can hear it in my voice. Okay. So if you were reading these psukim and you were looking at what's happening in Vayikra and you look at Devarim, and I asked you, how do you define a kosher animal? You would tell me a kosher animal chews its cud and it has split hooves. Now, just one side point, what do we mean by chewing the cud? Like, what does that mean? So if you look in our picture of the cow, again, you probably didn't think you learned biology here too. You may know this, but when the animal chews its cud, so it chews, it's called remuneration, I think it's called. So it chews it up, it swallows it. It goes down to like number 1 over there in the corner. And then it comes back on up, and then it's softened through the acids in like the stomach. Most animals that do rumination, that chew the cud, have like 4 cavities in their stomach. Giraffe, I believe, has maybe 3. I think. And so there's rumination, and so it comes back up to the cow's mouth, and then it comes back. Then it goes back to the masam, and then eventually up again, and then to the obamasam. Again, I'm probably mispronouncing that. There's a really cool thought here. Is like, why is chewing the cud so important? So cows are in, like, there's this term like fight or flight. Cows only flight. They don't fight. So you chase a cow, the cow runs. The cow never fights back. And so if a cow is constantly like having to be on the move and running, so there may be something about like being able to graze a lot and keep it in your stomach, and then like not have to worry about being able to graze later on, because you're like, you have stuff that you keep on, like the cud comes back up. And so there could be like some like evolutionary pieces to this. And anyways, that's what I mean by chewing the cud. And this is like, have you ever seen an animal like constantly chewing? Like, this is what it's talking about over here. But again, if you were to compare these 2 sets, it's obvious that chewing one's cud and split hooves is the rules here. But if I were looking at Devarim, what might we think? we might think that the only animals that are in fact kosher are what? These 10 animals. Why would the Torah specifically tell us 10 animals? Like, there's lots of animals. Why would it tell us 10 animals are good, 3 animals are bad? So one possible way of reading this text, that these are the only 10 animals that are kosher. Now, when I say these are the only 10 animals, I want to be clear. And again, this is like biology, which is that there's like genus or genome, right? I don't know, whatever it is. There's like something, and then there's there's subcategories, right? So there's like deer, and then there's like different type genome or genus or I haven't studied biology since AP Bio in high school, so it's been a minute. So yeah, so you have these things, and so when these 10, no question, represent categories. But the question is, what about other animals? Can they exist as do they fit in? So the Rambam tells us in box number 4 in Hilchos Machals Asuros, Ein lecha b'chol be'ema v'chaya she'olam shemuter b'achil chutz ma'aseret haminim hamanuyim b'Torah. The Rambam tells us that the only kosher animals in the world are the 10 that are listed here in the Psukim and all the related species. These are the only 10 that a person can eat. Right, this is it. And the Aruch HaShulchan tells us the same thing. In the bold, these are the 10 that a person could eat, and that's it, right? Like, these are the 10 that are kosher. And again, there's a big debate about like what we mean by like each of these animals and like what are they, and we'll talk more about that towards the end. Now, we talked again, so we have our categories like behema, chaya, oaf, dagim, and like shrutzim. So let's talk just about like our mammals here. So like we have to actually make a distinction, an important distinction between a behema and a chaya, between a domesticated animal and an undomesticated animal. Now, when we think about this distinction, the Torah tells us there are a few differences when it comes to a behema and a chaya. So, for example, if you look in Vayikra, it tells us ki kol ochel chel min abema shi'akri mena yishel Hashem v'nichrata nefesh ha'ochad me'amat. Anyone who eats the fat of an animal from which offerings by fire may be made to Hashem, the person who eats it shall be cut off. There's currents. So what is the Torah here telling us here in this pasuk? The Torah is telling us any animal that is fit to be offered on the altar. In other words, any animal which is a domesticated animal. We don't put wild animals. We don't put a chaya on the altar. So the chelev, the fat, is not allowed to be eaten. Is not allowed to be eaten because it's designated in a sense for the mizbeach. Now, this is a really fascinating side note here, which is that the like fat, the chelev of a behema is oftentimes like used, like that fat is used for all types of like recipes and stuff like this. And because it's not kosher to eat the fat of a behema, so what evolved over time is like, what fat does the Jewish community eat a lot of? Schmaltz. What's schmaltz? I think it's like chicken fat or something, right? So you may ask, like, why is there all this like schmaltz, and why did that become so popular in all these like dishes that we're making, whether it's Thanksgiving, Shabbos, or whatever? And the answer is because we can't take the chelev from a behema. We have to take the chelev from another type of animal. And so it's easier to take it from a chicken. And this is why in all the recipes, we have this as a substitution, just kind of like an interesting side point. So that's one distinction about chelev. Chelev, eating the fat, is different for a behema as it is for a chaya. If we were to continue and try to make distinctions, you'll notice in box number 7, another distinction has to do with kisui hadam, covering the blood. The ish mimnei Yisrael min hager agar b'tocham asher atzut tzayid chaya o of asher yachel v'shafach et amo v'chisau ba'afar. If you hunt down an animal, a bird, a chaya, a wild animal or a bird that is fit to be eaten, you need to cover up the blood. So there's kisui hadam, but you don't have to cover up the blood for a behema. Now, again, this might sound technical, but this is going to be important for us because there's a distinction between, what I'm trying to emphasize here is that there's this distinction between a behema and a chaya. And it's this distinction that's going to ultimately help us determine whether or not an animal that is not on the list, like a giraffe potentially, is something that we can in fact eat. And so the Shulchan Aruch tells us this explicitly, that Chazal gave us signs about what is and is not a kosher animal, and which is and is not a behema or a chaya. And you can see in box number 8, it tells us this explicitly. Now, what happens in a case, for example, where we do not know whether an animal is a behema or a chaya? Let's say we don't know. What would be a situation where we don't know? How could we not know if an animal is domesticated or not? Well, it's an animal that we maybe never came across before, right? We live in a time where we see we can go on the Animal Planet or on Wikipedia or the internet, but what happens if we saw an animal that we didn't know what it was? So the Mishnah in Bikurim tells us, a koi, in some ways, is like a chaya, a wild animal. In some ways, it's like a behema. In other words, this is an example of an animal that we don't know in source number 9. We don't know what it is and what it's not, right? We just don't know what it is, whether it's a behema or a chaya. In some ways, it acts like a behema and a chaya. In some ways, it's neither like a behema and neither like a chaya. And so when we have a suffix, the Shulchan Aruch tells us, the Mechaber writes again in box 8 in Yoredea, not Yoreyeah, sorry, box halacha hey, kol shistapek lecha imhu min chaya o min behema chalbo asur ve'ein lokin alav machasin et damo. What is the rule here? You take the stringencies of both. There's a stringency when it comes to a chaya that we have to do kisui hadam. So because we don't know, we have to take the stringency and cover the blood of this animal. And because we don't know, it also means that the chelav is asur because it might be a behema. And if it's a behema, the chelav is asur. And so in a case where we don't know what it is, we have to take the stringencies of both of those animals. So now that we've kind of laid down some of the groundwork, let's go back to like the kashrus of animals and figure out here what are like the ground rules. How do we know whether an animal is in fact a kosher animal? And again, this is going to be critical. So we said before, let's take a look here in box number 10 in Maseches Shvulim. So Amar Rav Chisda, Hayam halach b'midbar matzah behema shepursuta chotechet bodek b'fia im ein la shinayim lemala b'yadua shi torah v'lemala b'yadua shi tamea. So what happens if you find an animal who has split hooves, but you don't know anything else about it? You're not sure, is this a kosher animal or not? So what do? We inspect its mouth, and if it has no like incisors, it has no like upper sharp teeth, right? Then it must be a kosher animal. And what's the exception to this? There's an exception. Is an animal like a gamal, which does not have this, but does have split hooves. And so that's issue number 1. So if you ever see an animal that and you're out there and it has split hooves and it doesn't have incisors, you can assume that it was in fact is a kosher animal, unless it is a camel. Alternatively, we know that any animal that chews its cud and has split hooves is a kosher animal, with the exception of a camel. So that's like rule number 2 here. Amar Rav Chisda hayam mahalech b'derech matzah behema shepia gamum bodek persa. So what happens if you find that the mouth was mutilated? You can't open the animal's mouth. You can't actually see what's going on in the mouth. So again, we can look at we can check other things to see if it's going to be kosher. So for example, we could check to see if it has split hooves. And again, we know that all animals that have split hooves are kosher with the exception of the pig. And so what the Gemara here is doing, you can read through it on your own here. It's coming up with these different categories to help us identify whether or not an animal is in fact a kosher animal. So it has to chew its cud, has to have split hooves. It likely doesn't have incisors. And the Gemara even says something about like the meat itself. If you can look like the meat by like the tail. Also, that's another example. So the Gemara here lists all these different examples for whether or not an animal is kosher. We can identify it. So this seems to imply that we can look and we can investigate, and by looking at these animals, we have the ability to determine whether or not the animal itself is kosher. So the implication here is what? That if we can determine that it's kosher, so if we find an animal that meets the qualifications, then it should be kosher. So let's talk about our friend the giraffe. The giraffe, does it chew its cud? Yes. Does a giraffe also have split hooves? Yes. So if that's the case, so maybe in fact it should in fact be kosher, like the encyclopedia article says, but we have this shechting issue, which we'll have to get to a little bit later on. But I want to take you to one other piece, which is really important for our discussion, which is box 11 on the next page. which is from Bechoros. And in Bechoros, we see here that this tells us that there's one other important identifier. Actually, there's one other one, but there's another important identifier about a kosher animal, and that is when the kosher animal, whether or not it can breed. Kosher animals can only breed with other kosher animals. In other words, an animal that breeds with a kosher animal, by definition, must be a kosher animal. That's what the Gemara tells us. So again, I'm trying to give you all these pieces, and then we're going to put it all together to try to identify, well, what can we serve at our home. There is some other interesting proofs that are used, for example, about the horns of an animal, that they have to have a certain type of horn. All kosher animals have horns, and maybe if we have time, we'll come back to it at the end. I think it's kind of like an interesting thing. So as a summary here, it's pretty straightforward. If we can identify the hooves, if we can identify whether the animal chews its cud, even if we can't identify if it's chewing its cud, so long as we can identify that it can breed with other animals, or that it has doesn't have incisors, or we could check the meat by the meat, whether it's crossed by the tail, all these different things, we know that it's kosher unless it's a pig or it's a donkey or a camel. And that's why, if you go back to the Pesukim on the first in box 2 and 3, you'll notice I highlight the word vehu, because the Gemara here in Pasuk Zion in Perek Yud Aleph is highlighting, why does it keep telling us etachazir ki mafris parsa hu v'shosat shesa parsa vehu? Why does it keep using the word vehu over and over again? It's meant to be the exception to the rule, to basically prove the rule. And so what we see here is that there is very clearly, it's very, very clear as to what are the rules for identifying kosher animals. But now let me stir the pot with an enigmatic comment by the Shach. And this messes everything up. The Shach says in box 17, it's talking here about, the context here is about chaylev over here. And he says something that is going to mess us up here in a major way. He says, "Ve'im heim mefusalat kruchot v'adarot v'charukot ayin perush shel dvarim elu b'beis Yosef u'lafi she'in lanu ata elama shekibalnu b'misora so gabe simanei ha'ov katzarti." So what does he say here? He introduces an idea called misora. What does misora mean? We need to have a tradition that the animal, like birds, and we'll talk more about this, this plays a much bigger role in the world of birds than it does here. We have to have a misora, some tradition that it's a kosher animal. Without a tradition it's a kosher animal, then you won't know. Now the question is, we have to identify here is what is he referring to? Is he referring to that we're not allowed to eat chaylev without mesora, like specifically about not eating the chaylev of a behema? Is that what he's talking about? Because that's the context. Or could his comment be taken a little bit further to be applied to all types of kashrus, whether or not it's kosher or not? We need a mesora. Now I want to be very clear. Nowhere until now have we seen anything about the word mesora. The Gemara doesn't talk about the mesora. The Mishnah doesn't talk about mesora. The Torah doesn't talk about mesora. It doesn't exist until the Shach makes his comment over here about mesora. Rabbi Bleich has an amazing article. I don't have it in front of me, but I'll share it with anyone who wants. That really dissects this in a beautiful way. There's another article in Tchumen that was written in 20 years ago. I forget which I think Tchumen 20, I think it was. Also, that talks through this Shach and this whole topic in general. So if we look here carefully, the Chachmas Adam takes the Shach and takes it a little bit further than we may want. Let's just read the bold part. Because we only eat the Mesora, only foods we eat, like when you go to RKM, they don't have a section of giraffe meat. It doesn't exist. You go to Muncie, you don't find that. What kind of meat do we serve? We eat cows, and maybe we eat like lamb. I don't know what other animals are in the beef department. It's not many, right? That's the Mesora. That's what we do. That's our tradition. So this is what he says. We can't eat any of the other chayot. The only thing we can eat is a tzvi, which is like the category of like a deer or something like that. ibex maybe. Like that's the only thing that we can eat. We can't eat anything beyond that on the category of chayot. And the Pischei Tshuva quotes over here the Beis Yaakov, which takes it even further than this, that it's not just referring to, again, like chayos, that as the Chachmas Adam says, the Pischei Tshuva quotes the Beis Yaakov, that it's all kashrus for both behemos and chayos. That if it doesn't fit, if it's not something you have a Masorah for, we cannot eat that animal. Even if it fits into all the other categories, if we don't have a tradition, we can't eat it. And the Pischei Tshuva says that's crazy. It's the opposite. So he argues and says that it's not true. He doesn't think that's true. And he thinks that this position is without basis whatsoever. Now, what does that mean though? So you've got the Chachmas Adam on the one side, and you've got based on the Shach, and our friend the Aruch HaShulchan in box number 20 tells us, that like Tachlis, like we're not experts, so we should just follow the Masorah. So I want to be clear about this for a second. This is like a little bit feels like, I don't want to take away from this because Shach is a Shach, but it's almost like, listen, we don't really know about it, so let's just take a stringency and not do it, right? Like we don't have a full Masorah. The Aruch HaShulchan, and by the way, the Chai Adam and the Chachmas, the author of the Danzig, the author of the Chai Adam, the author of the Chachmas Adam, before the Mishnah Berurah was written, this was like the legal text that people use to understand how to live their lives. And so there is like this custom that we don't do it. Now let's like fast forward though to like some problems or some like real life cases. So we have, for example, the buffalo. The buffalo, I gave you a cool chart. Man, the internet, thank God I have the internet and not an encyclopedia, because I was able to find a cool chart that highlights all these different types of buffalo that are there. And you'll notice, for example, that they are unique to different areas. Let's look at the ones that are unique to North America. Now, is there any Masorah? Is there any way that there is a Masorah, that there's a tradition for the North American buffalo or bison or whatever they're called, right? No way, Jose. Jews only started living here like in the last 200 years, right? So, and certainly not going back centuries. So certainly not. However, we see that they're all like kind of related to each other. The pictures didn't come out so well here in the printed copies. They look similar. They can be clearly distinguished. They have all of the categories. They can be crossbred. In fact, there was something like in I don't remember when this happened. At some point when I was growing up, like serving like a bison burger became like really popular. It was like a thing. I don't know if there was a moment, right? And they like even crossbred bison with other animals to get like like other cattle. I think it's called like a beefalo or something like that, like a bison and a cow together or something, whatever. And that was like, that's like the bison meat that we know it. And so here you have over here all these kosher animals. And you have all these bison, that seemingly fit into the categories, all these buffaloes, they seemingly fit into the category of kosher animals, but yet we might not have a Masorah for them. It's interesting, if you look at the Abarbanel and Malachim, it's like so cool. Like the Abarbanel actually describes, remember we talked about the 10, if you go back again, the 10 list of 10 that are kosher. So one of them is Yachmor, and the Yachmor, he says, is buffaloes, right? Like he writes out the word like buffaloes, right? Also, I think the buffalo in America, the American buffalo, I think is a bison, which calls into question the entire city of Buffalo, and like we should probably rename it like bisons, the bison. I don't know why it's called buffalo, but it's probably a bison, not a buffalo. But like so. There is some within like Chazal and like the Meforshim, there is a reference to buffaloes. Like you can see even in the Shulchan Aruch, ha buffalo nagu shelo lechaso damo. The buffalo, we have the custom not to cover its blood. Like the Shulchan Aruch saw a buffalo in his life, because you see that there were buffaloes in Europe and Africa and Asia, but not everyone necessarily had a Masorah. So what do we do about buffalo? So it's like a big question. We're not exactly sure. And if you flip the page, this is it's like a really cool article. from Ynet, buffalo meat declared kosher by the chief rabbinate in 2006. And I love the like subheading, bad news for water buffaloes. Chief rabbi issues Kashrus certification after closely examining issue. I love that. Bad news for the buffaloes, right? So, but like, here you go. It seems to be that it fits all the categories. It should be kosher. But the fact that it's not like a slam dunk is related to this question about the Masorah going back to the Shach. And there's another animal, and this is another interesting controversy that I want to share with you, that I think also is something for us to think about, is regarding the zebu. The zebu is like a cattle. I think I think it was called like the Indian ox. It's like got like these, like, you've seen them in like a zoo, I'm sure you have. So as the zebu is more like a cattle, but again, it has this question about Masorah. And this question of Masorah is, well, where does it fit in? If we don't have a Masorah for it, can we or can we not do it? And the Chazon Ish, if you look in box number 23, I mean, he's very, very explicit about what we can and can't do. It happens to be that there was, like in the 1950s, the Vaad Rabbanim in Paris wanted to export the zebu to Israel. And the chief rabbin had a big debate about it. And some rabbis felt like we could, and some rabbis said we couldn't. And again, they were like, I think Rav Herzog wrote an article about this and this really cool pamphlet that I was able to get to see this week. But the Chazon Ish felt very, very strongly that we have to hold like the Chachmas Adam, and extends this Chumrah well beyond and tells us we cannot do it. And you can see it here in the text. You can read it on your own. We're just short on time here. But he says like that we have to like he Zeu chidush shechidshu hashach. This is the chiddush of the shach. Hayali lakotvo b'lashon hara shenira lo. Right, and we should follow what the shach says. And this is actually quite significant because in doing so, the Chazon Ish is like creating unnecessary, I don't want to say unnecessary, additional chumras for the community to safeguard the community from like going wrong. That's what we're trying to do. The Chazon Ish wants to kind of protect us. And out of respect to the Chazon Ish, the community in Israel, they do not eat the zebu meat. Now, here's where it gets fun and exciting. In 2004, there was a great zebu meat controversy when we found out that the meat that comes in from Argentina was in fact not cattle, and it wasn't cow meat. What was it? Zebu. And the like real exciting part about this is, do you know, like the meat that came in was like the most kosher hashgacha, like, you know, like the highest level of kashrus was the zebu meat. So in 2004, we have a big problem. All the meat that all the people who are observant and certainly the whole Haredi community, they're eating this zebu meat. And so it's a huge issue. And we know that, again, like the zebus, like their meat is kosher. They chew their cuds, split hooves. They could mate. They could breed with kosher animals. In some parts of the world, they take their milk and make like, you know, cheeses out of them, right? So like it's got everything. And so it was determined, this is like crazy, it was determined by like a group of people, Yashav and others, that the zebu meat is technically kosher. However, like out of respect, the Chazon Ish were not going to do it. And in fact, if you look over here underneath this buffalo meat declared kosher, you have to like really look really carefully. This is a tag that you can find from someone from a piece of like a kosher tag. It says what? Chalak be Yosef, b'dikat manim amazkira, neki mechashash zabu. Neki mechashash zabu. This meat does not have any zabu in it. Like, so they want to make sure that's extra kosher, right? Bakar musag zabu kasher lo chashash. So it tells us that even if the chief rabbinate wrote that even if you had zebu, you don't have to worry about it. You're going to be kosher. But we are just putting this down on the tag just so everybody knows about it as well. And so many people felt that you can't eat zebu. And for example, like in the States, probably you could. Not, I don't know where they would serve it. But like it also, I think Moshe Feinstein, Russia Weiss, others say that you can and all that. And so let's now circle back to how we began. So it sounds like if we can find an animal that fits into our categories here and has a Masorah to it, then perhaps we can, in fact, if it has a Masorah and it fits the categories, then for sure we can eat it. And what happens if it doesn't have a Masorah? So this is this gray area where we have to decide, do we want to hold like the Chachmas Adam and the Shach and the Aruch HaShulchan and the Chazon Ish, or do you want to hold like more modern approach, which takes into account like the science of the things and the words of the Gemara itself, besides the words of the Shach? And so when it comes to the giraffe, two things are really interesting. Number one, when it comes to the giraffe, there actually might be a Masorah of Sajagon. Of course, I like cut it off. I'm so upset in my haste. He translates and writes that the Zemer is a Zaraf. Zaraf sounds an awful lot like what? The giraffe. And it's probably, this is Rabbi Bleichman's article writes, it's probably the first, Sajagon was the first to identify that there might be some history of giraffe. Some suggest that the Tachash might have been the giraffe, because the Tachash, which was used in the Mishkan, had this like beautiful skin. And so like giraffe skin, like the giraffe hide, is a beautiful hide. Rabbi Slifkin in his first book talked and made an argument that it was. And in a subsequent book about like mythical creatures or monsters and mythical creatures, whatever the second book was, actually went back on it and said it can't be the Tachash, and that's like an interesting thing unto itself. And so the question is, well, why can't we eat giraffe? So it could be we can't eat giraffe because of this issue of Masorah. But like I said before, there is this bigger issue, which is like, well, we don't know how to shech the giraffe, right? And that's like what they told us like when we were children. This is what the encyclopedia says as well. However, that is 100% incorrect. Let me set the record straight. Take a look at this article from Jewish Action, Rabbi Ari Zivotofsky, who also wrote countless articles on this as well. There is no need to equivocate. The specific anatomic boundaries for the ritual slaughter of all animals apply to the giraffe as well. For a pigeon, the valid region is a few inches long. For a cow, it's 12 inches. And for a giraffe, it's close to 6 feet. A Kashrus expert once quipped that anyone who does not know where to shech the giraffe either knows nothing about the laws of Shlita or could not hit the side of a barn with a baseball. What's the takeaway here? We don't not eat giraffe because we don't know how to shech it. That is incorrect. I'm sorry, encyclopedia from the Haredi community. That is not true. We don't eat giraffe because of this issue of Masorah. We know where to shecht it, on the neck. And you know what? A giraffe has a pretty long neck. You can shecht it anywhere along the neck. Whereas like a pigeon, you want to like shecht a pigeon, it's like the area is like 2 inches. You have like 6 feet to work with. So if you can't figure out where to shecht the giraffe, you probably can't hit the side of a barn with a baseball, as Rabbi Zivotofsky said. And so coming full circle here, I think this is interesting for us, not just because there's this mitzvah saseh that the Rambam discusses that I shared with you, but more than that, I think this discussion warrants us to start to think about how do we interact with these different halachot when the Torah tells us something quite explicitly, and then when we have our sages come and they add a stringency to us, which may or may not feel right, but there is a stringency and there's a custom that we have taken upon ourselves. How do we struggle with that relative to our own modern intellectual understanding of things? And there's no question, like I said, like as the zebu, most people will tell you is a kosher animal. Like they'll tell you it's kosher. But out of respect to the Chazon Ish's opinion in Israel, it's the chief rabbin doesn't say that it's kosher. And so how do we balance those things as Jews living in the modern world, number one? And number two, how do we challenge ourselves, not just to like, do and like go shopping, like I'm not advocating we should go out and get giraffe meat tomorrow or zebu meat or buffalo, bison or whatever tomorrow, but we should be thinking a little bit more actively about the things that we eat and realize that there's a lot that goes into it and a lot of interesting pieces that allows it to be kosher for ourselves to enjoy. So we'll stop here. Next week, we'll spend some time talking about turkeys and in particular Thanksgiving. So we'll stop here and wish everybody a wonderful evening.